Well, welcome into Bayou Roar. On this episode, we are talking about the college football playoff. I'll give my predictions for it very soon. And we'll also be talking about LSU's 2026 schedule and some transfer portal news for the Tigers. But we're going to start by talking about the college football playoff because I know that is the biggest topic on everybody's mind as we are just a few days away from the first round getting started. And I want to begin by talking about the fact that I do think the committee did a good job of selecting all of the Power Four teams that they let in. I know there was a lot of conversation about should this team be in and or that team be in, but I think they got the right Power Four teams into the playoff this year. Bama, I know, was a hot topic because, they got just absolutely kicked around during the SEC championship. But listen, I think the playoff committee had to protect conference championships at some point because if Alabama loses that game and they get kicked out, then you basically send a message to the rest of the SEC that says, hey, if you're on the bubble of the playoff and you make it to the SEC championship game, you might as well, I don't know how you would do it, whether you just don't show up. I don't know. But basically you tell the players in that game, like, hey, you don't really want to play this game because if you lose, you may be out. And then we have this whole new controversy on do teams try to opt out somehow of the conference championship games? And I think that was a Pandora's box that you just cannot open. I think if you are already in the playoff from the rankings before championship weekend and you play in the playoff and you play in the conference championship game, then your spot should at least be secure that you're somewhere in the 12 spots. Now, if they had dropped Bama, I think that would have been absolutely fine to, lower than 9. I don't know where they really could have gone, maybe to 10 or 11 or whatever. But with that being said, yeah, you couldn't just kick Alabama out because then you're opening the door for this whole new conversation that you're not ready to have of what if teams start trying to opt out of conference championship games because it could have kept them out. And look, that's not the only reason why they kept Bama in. Bama's obviously got other things going for it. They've got the brand, they had the strength of record, like they had a really honestly one of the best wins all season going on the road to Georgia and winning. Like Alabama's resume for the most part was not necessarily a bad resume. Like they got in mostly based off of that. But again, when you already had them in the college football playoff, they play the SEC championship game and they lose. If you had kicked them out, it could have spelled disaster for the future of conference championships, but at least you're preserving that the rest of the way. But other than that, I think Miami honestly was probably the best choice out of them or Notre Dame, only because they won the head-to-head. I think it's just as simple as that. I think, when you win your head-to-head matchup between the other team, they're kind of debating putting you in against, like, that head-to-head should count for just about everything. And they were basically tied in every other category. They were either one spot ahead or one spot behind of each other. Like, I think that was a good choice to put them in as well. Now, the biggest problem I have is this. We have 2 group of 5 schools in the college football playoff. And look, Tulane could end up shocking the world and beating Ole Miss. JMU could end up shocking the world and somewhat competing against Oregon. But listen, it's about time with this new expanded format that we just go ahead and say goodbye to this whole group of 5 auto bid thing and give the group of 5 their own playoff or something like that. Because at the end of the day, this is not like March Madness. March Madness is completely different because basketball is completely different. In basketball, you can have a smaller school that can get a really good collection of players together, guys that are maybe slept on in recruiting, that just need a chance to play. They maybe hit a growth spurt in college and, fill out a little bit more or something like that. And they're able to play really good basketball together. I think a lot of times why you see smaller schools in basketball do really well in March Madness is because a lot of times you're seeing those rosters have guys that are playing, in their junior or senior years, and the starting five has been together for like 2 or 3 years. They know how to play with each other and hey, this guy likes to go here and all that. In basketball, there is a chance for smaller schools to have success. I mean, think about, like, I know Villanova is a powerhouse in basketball, but like, I mean, is there any other sport that you know of that Villanova is considered a powerhouse in? Like Duke is really great at basketball, but in like football, they just won the ACC championship. Great. But like, is there any other sport that you really say, oh, Duke just dominates in, right? Like, there's just a different feel with March Madness than college football, because in college football, there is a difference between the players that you are getting at a Georgia or an Ohio State as compared to James Madison. There just is. There's always going to be that gap. No matter how close the group of five comes to being somewhat near the Power Four, there is always going to be a gap. Because for every AJ Halsey, for every really solid player that can come from a group of five school, guess what? An Ohio State's probably got a whole secondary full of AJ Halseys. Because AJ Halsey went to Houston, if you don't remember, and then transferred to LSU. Like, Georgia's probably got 4 or 5 really high level players to maybe one player on a group of 5 school that could end up transferring to a Power 4 school and being a star or something like that. It's just hard to see a world where a group of 5 school ever competes fairly, at least, with a Power 4 school, unless the Power 4 school is just absolutely off of their game. So that's my biggest gripe with the college football playoff. We've got 2 matchups that are basically layups in the first round, barring something crazy happening. And it's because we won't just let the group of 5 have their own playoff. Boise State, I think, should have been a prime example last year of why this doesn't work. I get it. Ashton Jeanty was a phenomenal player. He had a phenomenal year last year. But then what happened once they got to the playoff? They got absolutely rocked because their roster just cannot compete, especially in the NIL era, with a roster of a Power 4 school. So give the group of 5 their own playoff. I think that's more than fair. But let's put only Power 4 schools into the college football playoff from now on, because that is going to ensure the most, fair and the better matchups, honestly. And I'm not trying to be like this Power 4 conference elitist or something like that. It's just, there is a difference in that. Again, that's why March Madness in basketball is so fun, because anybody can win. Anybody has a chance of going on a Cinderella run, as we like to call it, and winning. Seeing Steph Curry take Davidson through the tournament on a long run is a lot of fun. Seeing Florida Gulf Coast just, high flying, fast paced dunking over everybody going on this magical tournament run is fun. But when it comes to college football, there is just a big gap that exists between the Power 4 and the group of 5, and it can never happen, in my mind at least, where a Cinderella run will ever be possible for a group of 4 team. But with that being said, here are the matchups that we do have at hand for the first round. You've got Alabama going up against Oklahoma as the 8 and 9 matchup. You've got Oregon going up against James Madison as the 5 and 12. Got A&M and Miami at the 7 and 10 spot. And then Ole Miss going up against Tulane. I'll go quickly with 2 of these because I believe they're just absolute layups. Obviously, I've got Ole Miss beating Tulane. Push all the junk out the window of Ole Miss being distracted. Pete Golding won't get them ready. They're using, a lame duck, you know, offensive coaching staff because they're basically already working for LSU, whatever. Yeah, 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 yeah. It doesn't matter because Ole Miss is a significantly better team than Tulane. They already played each other this year, and Ole Miss smacked them around. It's going to be Ole Miss beating Tulane. There's the end of discussion. There's no more to say about that. So Ole Miss is going to win the first round game and move on to Georgia. Oregon and James Madison, outside of the fact that they did not play each other in the regular season this year, I have the same sentiments toward. I think Dan Lanning and company will, have James Madison come out to Eugene, Oregon, show them a nice time in the city and have a lot of fun. And then they're just going to absolutely smack them around for 4 quarters and basically just get ready for the next game. So Oregon beats James Madison. And I just don't see a world where either of these games are really close. You've got weeks to prepare for these teams. If you're Ole Miss and Oregon, you've got Dan Lanning, one of the best coaches in college football, game planning for this. You just got an Ole Miss offense, honestly, that's still, going to have all their pieces. Keywan Lacey, Trinidad Chambliss, all of the guys that they need to go out there and just put up points. They've still got them. Both of these games are just going to be absolute smackings. Oregon, Ole Miss win, move on to the next round. So that would put Oregon up against Texas Tech. But now we get to the more interesting games in the first round, which is Bama, Oklahoma, and A&M, Miami. And I'll start with A&M, Miami. A&M is a team that I have been very skeptical of all year, and I think the biggest problems that I have with A&M showed up during the last game of the season against Texas when Texas pulled off the upset. I have said throughout most of the season to people that I have just talked to about college football that when it comes to A&M, Marcel Reed is the one thing that I think kind of makes me nervous about picking A&M significantly. Because Marcel Reed is not a great thrower of the football. He has improved his footwork. I know they about highlight that, I think, every A&M game. But his arm is not really that strong. Like, the ball kind of just flutters when it comes out of his hand. He's got phenomenal weapons on the outside. Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver. Those guys are absolute studs on the outside. They've got great weapons. Le'Veon Moss is a really great running back. If he's healthy and raring to go, great. If not, EJ Smith and the other backs they've got in the backfield are also phenomenal. Marcel Reed with his legs, incredible. But it's just Marcel Reed struggles to throw the ball consistently well. And I said almost all season to people that I talk ball with, Marcel Reed's going to have games where he's going to throw 2 or 3 picks. And most of the time, they don't matter because they're beating up on whatever team they're playing. But eventually, he's going to run into teams that will capitalize on his turnovers, and they will lose the game. And that's what happened against Texas. He threw a couple picks. Texas was able to take advantage of the interceptions, turn them into points, and pull ahead. And that's how Texas basically ended up winning out the game. Now, that is obviously the biggest red flag. I also don't know if A&M's defense outside of their defensive front is really as elite as everybody else thinks it is. They've been playing really good. Like, their defense is not bad. It's just, I think their front seven really carries a lot of the work for that defense because that secondary can absolutely be picked on at times. They've got some good playmakers back there in the secondary, but they have been taken advantage of off and on throughout the year. Now, on the flip side, you've got Miami. Miami's defense has been pretty solid all year. Their front has been pretty good. Their defensive line, really, really solid. But they've also got a big red flag at quarterback, which is Carson Beck. Carson Beck, when he is absolutely on, he is on. and he plays like a really, really great quarterback. But the problem is, he also at times can struggle with putting the ball into the opposition's hands. He struggles a lot with that. Now, they've got some solid running backs. They've got some really solid receivers. LSU fans probably already know and are just horrified at the fact that CJ Daniels actually became a really great receiver this year at Miami, something he just couldn't break out and do last year at LSU. But nonetheless, great targets over in Miami. So, really, what this game comes down to is who do I think will make the biggest mistakes and who do I think can make better plays? Here's where I think the game comes down to for A&M Miami. I think there's one quarterback. I think both quarterbacks will make mistakes. Like let's get that out of the way. I think they're both going to throw multiple interceptions. It's going to be kind of a mess. But what quarterback can end up making the bigger plays happen to pull their team out at the end of the day? Well, I think that's Texas A&M. I think Marcel Reed has an advantage over Beck in the fact that he is an absolutely electric athlete on his feet. That guy can scoot with the best of them, and he is extremely fast. Now, he may snap in half if you get a good hit on him, but he can run. And the other thing is sometimes with the weapons that he has, it doesn't take a whole lot. You just kind of slip a real fast screenplay out to Craver or Concepcion, and they're off to the races and gone. That's honestly how they've won a lot of their games. Just they're out athleting a lot of the defenses they go up against. I don't know if you'll be able to do that consistently against Miami, but at the end of the day, I don't know if Beck has got it in him to pull out the big play at a crucial moment in time as compared to a Marcel Reed who's got a ton of athleticism. I think Marcel Reed makes a huge play at some point, puts A&M up, and I think A&M wins. So I got A&M beating Miami, moving on to Ohio State. So now we've got Oklahoma-Bama, and I'm not going to lie. This is the one game in the first round that I'm the most torn on. I have been going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on this one forever. Because Bama, after the Florida State loss, really caught fire and started just absolutely getting better and better each week. They really did. They had a stretch of the year following that opening loss where they just looked like they were, just absolutely determined to flip everything back around. Ty Simpson was playing on another level. The offense was humming. Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, Ryan Williams, Jam Miller, the other running backs. They were cruising on offense. Defensively, still had some ups and downs, but offensively, they were cruising. And, the defense did enough to, help them win some games and stuff like that. But then, man, it seems like the back half of the year, though, they have really started to struggle offensively. They really have. And Ty Simpson has not looked the same. The deep ball just hasn't been there as consistently as it was in the first half of the year. Honestly, Ty as a whole has not seemed to play up to the standard that he was playing at. There was one point in time, a few games into the season, especially after the Georgia win, a lot of people considered Ty Simpson to be the front runner for the Heisman Trophy. And if you had asked me going into November if I felt like Ty Simpson was the Heisman Trophy favorite, I probably would have said, well, if he's not, he's close to it. But Ty Simpson has not played great throughout the month of November heading into the playoff. Bama's offense has just kind of fallen apart. They rushed for -3 yards in the SEC championship against Georgia. -3. That is absolutely just horrific. And their defense also is just continuing to struggle to play with physicality, just to honestly put up good performances week in and week out. But on the flip side, it's not like Oklahoma has been that much better. Now, defensively, they have been a lot more solid all year long, and they're defense is basically what carried them in that game against Alabama on the road in Tuscaloosa earlier this year to a win, because they forced Ty Simpson to make mistakes and kind of made him look like a mortal for the first time all season. He had been playing at this otherworldly plane all season, and then Oklahoma kind of just made him look like a human being again. And it was kind of crazy to see that happen. And so Brent Venables, phenomenal defensive mind too. And you've got John Mateer and company, which like they haven't also had the best offensive output this year. Mateer has struggled with interceptions. Satania is a really good outside receiver. But it's like their offense has also not been great. And so really for me in this one, again, this kind of comes down to which offense do I think can get it together in a better way to go out there and win. And honestly, with just how bad Bama's offense has looked, I mean, I just don't know. It's hard to beat the same team twice. It is, especially in college football. And I think earlier in the week, I'd kind of penciled Bama into this as the winner because I don't know. It just seemed like, one of those games where Bama just would win because it is difficult to win twice. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've kind of dove into things. I just think you give Venables a couple weeks again to game plan for this offense, an offense that is absolutely maybe on its last leg at this point. And I just think that Oklahoma defense is good enough to where they can kind of beat up on Alabama, and I think they'll win. So I have Oklahoma now beating Alabama, moving on to Indiana. So now we're in the second round where we'll have Indiana against Oklahoma, Texas Tech against Oregon, Georgia against Ole Miss, and Ohio State against A&M. And again, I'll go to the ones that I think are easier for me to say first. I think Ohio State will easily beat Texas A&M. As good of weapons as A&M has, and Marcel Reed's got a great, athleticism to him and all that stuff. That Ohio State defense is something else, man. They've got great corners. They've got just a great secondary overall. Their front seven is phenomenal. I mean, they are a very, very solid defense. Their defense is probably one of the best in the country, if not the best in the country. And man, they're really, really solid. On top of that, you've got Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Julian Sayin. You've got Bo Jackson. I mean, you've just got an offense that's got some weapons there. And I'm not saying that, like, by any means, Julian Sayin's like the best quarterback in the country. I'm not saying that, like, the Ohio State offense is just this juggernaut. But like I said earlier, what's kind of been the weakness of A&M is the fact that sometimes their secondary can get picked on. So when you got two really good outside receivers in Tate and Jeremiah Smith, I think Ohio State's got the opportunities now to push the ball down the field and make that A&M defense have to stretch out, and that's not always been their strong suit this year. And I just think, again, this is going to be a game where Marcel Reed will throw, 2-3 interceptions maybe, because Ohio State's that ball savvy. And I just don't think there's any way to recover for A&M. I don't think there's enough plays to be had because Ohio State won't make, the same mistake. They will make you pay for turning the ball over. They won't give it right back to you. And so I think Ohio State beats them, and I think they beat them pretty soundly. So I got Ohio State winning. Then we get Georgia Ole Miss, another rematch. But here's the thing. This one's a little bit easier for me this time around because at the end of the day in the college football playoff, there's going to be one thing that can decide some of these matchups. Sometimes it's the quarterbacks. Sometimes it's the defenses. Sometimes it's special teams, honestly. Who's got a better kicker? But there's another thing that can impact how a college football playoff game is won, and that's coaching. And the truth is, when you're comparing the two coaches that are going to be leading these teams, Kirby Smart and Pete Golding, the answer is pretty obvious. Pete Golding is not at the same level, nor near the same level quite at all of Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart has been to the playoffs a lot. Kirby Smart has gone through this experience a lot. Kirby Smart has won 2 championships in the college football playoff era. Kirby Smart knows how to prepare his team for these games. And let's be completely honest, Pete Golding, I think again they'll beat Tulane and it'll be a great story. But then you get to a matchup with a team that is on the same playing field as you, and I think Georgia wipes the floor easily with them. I think when you don't have Lane Kiffin there to help call the offense and take advantage of stuff, be a part of the game plan, I think when you just have a head coach that you don't know how he's going to react in a crucial 2-minute situation. You don't know what he's going to do on a crucial situation in the fourth quarter when it's 4th and 2 and you're trying to decide, do you punt? Do you go for it? Do you kick a field goal? Do you go for a touchdown? We haven't seen Pete Golding in those situations as the head coach. And you're trying to figure that out in the playoff against Georgia with a guy who's been here over and over and over again. Yeah, it's pretty easy for me to then determine who I want for that. And so that's Georgia. So I think Georgia beats Ole Miss, Ohio State beats A&M, easy peasy. I think also I can say with pretty with certainty that Indiana is going to beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma's defense is really good, and they'll definitely push, I think, Fernando Mendoza and company to have to do well. But here's the thing. The one thing I applauded Indiana for a lot when they played Oregon in the early part of the season was that they went on the road to Eugene in a rainy environment, and they basically beat Oregon the way that they wanted to play ball, which was be physical, run the football, throw when you have to, but just play your style of ball, play good defense, run the ball, all that stuff. They were able to win significantly on the road at Oregon. But then Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game kind of took away that superpower. They took away Indiana's ability to run the ball effectively throughout most of the game. But Indiana was still able to reverse course and throw the ball and throw it well enough to pull out the win. Again, it wasn't an offensive explosion or anything, but Indiana was still able to pull out the game. So with that being said, I think this is a situation where even if Oklahoma's defense does show up in the front, which I think is where Oklahoma has more talent anyways, which is in their front, I still think it's not going to matter a whole lot. I still think Indiana's going to find a way to put up points. And I think that Indiana defense is so good, and they're so consistently good, especially with their front that can get a lot of pressure, can play really well, shut down a pretty good Ohio State offense throughout the majority of the championship game for the Big Ten. I don't see a world where Oklahoma really can put up enough points to win. So I have Indiana beating Oklahoma in that game. And so honestly, the toughest game on this board is Texas Tech versus Oregon. And look, again, this comes down to just a certain matchup here and there. And this is another one of those where you've got a Texas Tech defense that's playing really well. We know Dan Lanning's specialty is defense, so the Oregon defense is good, and they'll be solid. They'll be ready. Coaching, I think, even though the Texas Tech coach is not as experienced in terms of obviously Oregon made the playoff last year and had a lot of success last year, and Texas Tech did. And so this is his first time here. I think both of these coaches are really good. I really do. I think I think a lot of the Texas Tech coach. I think he's done a phenomenal job. But I think the biggest thing for me is honestly the offenses. Because I think where Oregon is going to end up having the advantage in this game is the fact that they can spread the ball out against Texas Tech's defense. Texas Tech has got some really great defensive linemen, and they can really shut down the run really well. But I think Dante Moore and those receivers, his tight ends, all those good things, I think at the end of the day, Oregon's offense has got a chance to be a little bit more explosive against the Texas Tech defense. And I don't know if I necessarily trust the Texas Tech offense to be like lighting up the scoreboard. Morton's had a solid season and all that. I just think if it's going down between who would I rather trust in this game to go out there and put up the numbers needed to go win a game, Morton or Dante Moore, I've been a little bit more impressed with what Dante Moore brings to the table. And again, I just think there's more weapons at Oregon to operate around the whole field and spread Texas Tech out. I know Texas Tech had some really dominant wins this year over a team like BYU, who was on contention for the college football playoff. But Oregon is on a completely different playing field than BYU is. And so I do believe that at the end of the day, Oregon will end up pulling out the victory over Texas Tech, which means we now have a matchup between Indiana and Oregon again, and Ohio State and Georgia. Ohio State, Georgia is another tough one for me because I could see a world where both teams win, and that's not normal for like this situation at this point in time. But I think that at the end of the day, you've got coaches who have been here before, so that's, not necessarily advantage to either school. I think both defenses have been really solid. I think both offenses have been good. But I think the difference for me in this game is honestly who Ohio State has on their offensive side. Again, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate are two phenomenal receivers. And Julian Sayin, although he is young and not super experienced, I mean, he's been solid at getting them the ball this year. And that offense has the potential to push the ball down the field, move the ball around, run the ball really well. And I just don't know if Georgia can compete with Ohio State's outside weapons. That Georgia defense has gotten a lot better as the year has gone along, but I also saw this same Georgia defense like struggle to guard Joey Aguilar and the Tennessee weapons, with a Tennessee team that was not necessarily as great offensively as they've been in the past. And Ohio State's defense, again, is very, very solid, especially in their front. I don't know if Georgia will have the offensive firepower needed to really combat what Ohio State can offer up on offense. Because Gunnar Stockton has been very up and down in my mind as well. There's some games he does look like he's playing really well and like he's playing a lot better than where he was at the beginning of the year. But at the same time, he still has his moments where he does not handle pressure very well from time to time. There's times where he still makes some pretty boneheaded decisions. And look, even though he's older than Julian Sayin, this is his first year starting. He hasn't played in a lot of big time, playoff games. He doesn't have like this 2 years of being the starter under his belt or anything like that. Gunnar Stockton is still very young himself. And just the problem is I don't know if you can get the ball down the field as well as Ohio State can. And Ohio State's defense is really, really solid. So I have Ohio State beating Georgia, which pains me because I would hate to see Ohio State go back to the Natty again. But there's something about them that just is like, man, when you got those type of guys on this roster, it is hard to imagine a world where I mean, you're going to have another really phenomenal team to beat them. I mean, you really are. I mean, this year they were out on a mission. I mean, Indiana had to put up the fight of their life, and Ohio State had to miss a field goal to beat them in the Big Ten title game. So, like, that's just a world where, man, if that's the type of effort that has to happen, I don't know if Georgia can do that. They're certainly capable of it, but I just don't know if they can pull it off. And so I think at the end of the day, Ohio State wins. It goes back to the national championship. Then we also got Indiana, Oregon, the rematch from the game earlier this year. And the problem is Oregon definitely has played well this year, but I think Indiana's been playing at the same consistent level all year long. And they beat probably one of the most impressive teams in college football this year, if not the most impressive college football team this year in Ohio State. And once again, even though it is hard to beat the same team twice, and even though this is on a neutral field, I mean, Indiana won the game at Oregon in the rain. I just have a hard time seeing a world where Indiana cannot pull this thing off again. And I know that might be the easy call. I would love to roll the dice on Dan Lanning in Oregon. But Dan Lanning in Oregon, I think, had a better team last year as the number 1 seed in the playoff, and they couldn't win. And so Indiana, I do think, pulls off the win over Oregon and makes it to the national championship as well. Which means we have an all Big Ten national championship with Indiana and Ohio State, the rematch of the Big Ten title game. And man alive, is this game going to be intense again? I mean, this game is going to be absolutely wild to watch. Again, that Big Ten championship game was intense. And here's the difference, I think, this time around. Ohio State in the Big Ten title game got stuffed on 4th down several times. I think there were several opportunities they left on the board. Indiana, I think, really flustered Julian Sayin, getting him off balance a lot. And I just think Indiana played really well. Again, they had to play a different style of football than they wanted to, a little bit, with having to throw a little bit more than running it. But they still put up a really great fight. Problem is, I wonder if the second time around, if Ohio State can figure out some of the things they did wrong and recover. Because again, they missed a field goal. I think if that game goes into overtime, it's a coin flip on who wins. And I would probably give a slight nod to Ohio State in that situation. But you're a missed field goal away from a tie ball game in the 4th quarter, late in the 4th quarter. You are a 4th down conversion away from potentially scoring a touchdown at some point. And I just think Ohio State, again, man, it's just their roster is so good. It's just so deep. Very, very talented team. And I can't see a world where they lose a second game to Indiana, because I think they will correct the mistakes they did the first time. And so as much as I hate to do this, I got Ohio State winning. We got Ohio State winning, and they're going to be the back-to-back national champions, which is, again, going to be horrible, but hopefully, like, good news will be on the horizon with that. And, like, maybe Carnell Tate will leave for the NFL. Maybe Caleb Downs will leave for the NFL. Maybe they'll have a good exodus where they're not as loaded next year. But definitely, for sure, this Ohio State team, man, they're just really good. And they just have a lot of depth too, which is just not common. So this isn't me just trying to pick the easy road. This is just me being honest with you. And so I've got Ohio State winning, because I just think their roster is just so phenomenally good. And again, if it comes down to a rematch with Indiana, I think they'll fix the mistakes they made the first time. But that's my college football playoff bracket. Of course, if I'm wrong, oh boy, I'll come back and take my lumps. But That's my college football playoff bracket. But we also had, since our last episode, the big news drop of the 2026 schedule for LSU. So we're going to talk about that and some transfer portal news as we wrap up. I know running through the bracket took a little bit of time, so I will kind of speed through the 2026 schedule and the transfer portal section of this. But of course, the 2026 SEC schedules dropped the other night for all of the teams in the Southeastern Conference. So we now know what Lane Kiffin's first schedule as the new head coach of LSU is going to look like. And look, oh man, this is going to be an interesting first year. So, of course, you got the big week 1 matchup against Clemson at home in Baton Rouge. So, that's going to obviously be electric. To be there on that night would be an incredible dream. But the ticket prices are probably going to be ridiculous. So, I probably won't end up going. But that's going to be a phenomenal game. Then you host Louisiana Tech. So, back-to-back years, you'll have Louisiana Tech come to town, which is not common, but still kind of cool. But then, man, week 3, I mean, this is insane, but not out of complete left field. You go on the road to play Ole Miss as your SEC opener at Vaught Hemingway in Oxford against Pete Golding and company. And man alive, is that game going to be hostile? I mean, absolutely hostile. You think ticket prices for that are going to be ridiculous? I bet Vaught Hemingway sells out faster than they ever have before. So at Ole Miss week 3. Then you host A&M. You host McNeese State in week 5. And then that's getting you into the month of October where, so A&M will be tough to close out September. So your September stretch is pretty tough. Clemson, Ole Miss, A&M. Then you have McNeese to start October. You go to Kentucky, which Kentucky will kind of be rebuilding next year with a new head coach in Will Stein. So not a great, ground to work off of. So Kentucky won't be as challenging potentially. You got a home game against Mississippi State on October 17th. Like, Mississippi State, again, is kind of rebuilding. They played a lot better this year, but, still a rebuilding team. So, not as big time of a matchup. You do go on the road to Auburn, and I'm not going to lie. That's a game that always is interesting. When LSU and Auburn play, that's always a really interesting game, especially considering it's at Jordan-Hare. They got some kind of voodoo down there too, man. I know Baton Rouge does too, but I'm telling you, Jordan-Hare, man, there's something that they cook down there that's different. So that's going to be interesting to close out October with, because then you'll have a bye week, which, man, I know it's the typical bye week before Bama, but man, it sucks that we'll have October 31st as a Saturday, and we won't have a Halloween night game at Tiger Stadium. I think that's just a crime against the college football schedule that LSU will not have a home game on Saturday night on Halloween. But anyways, then you go to November, which is probably the most brutal stretch of this entire schedule, because you host Bama, and then you host Texas the very next week. An Arch Manning-led Texas team the very next week. And then you go on the road to Tennessee, which, by the way, they're not big fans of Lane Kiffin either, so that should be fun. And then you end the year at Arkansas. Now, I will say this. I do love that Arkansas is going to be at the end of the year on Thanksgiving weekend again, because that's something that I think has kind of been missing. LSU is weird because, I feel like they've got rivals, but it's like the rivals are all different for different reasons. It's not like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, where there's a deep hatred there that's been running for a long time. It's not like Auburn, Bama, which is just hate that has been brewing for forever. It feels like a lot of LSU's quote unquote rivals are based off of very different things. We just hate, most teams in general, I guess. But I mean, A&M, we hate how petty they are. The 7 overtime cup game and all that stuff. We hate Ole Miss now because how much they're whining about Kiffin. That's going to be a rivalry built off of the Kiffin switch. Kind of the same thing with Bama. why did we hate Bama so much for a long time? Because Saban went there. I know some people will say, well, we just didn't like them before. They were all right. Yeah, whatever. Feels like these rivalries get kindled sometimes by just like, random things that happen. But Arkansas is kind of one of the few that you're like, okay, they do get a trophy, at the end of the year. It is like a rivalry that, like, growing up for me was always Thanksgiving weekend and all that. It was really weird when they switched it to not being on Thanksgiving weekend, and we got like Oklahoma and A&M for a long time. Like, I'm glad this is coming back to its regular state, but still, to end the season on 2 road games in the SEC is absolutely brutal. So that's the 2026 schedule, and honestly, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough year for LSU next year with this schedule. Not just because, like, saying that all the teams are going to be juggernauts, but just because of the way that it's set up. You're just going to have some tough stretches. It's always tough to win on the road in the SEC. It's always tough to go on the road twice in the SEC in back-to-back weeks and play when that's on your schedule. So there's just elements of it that make it hard. It's not necessarily the teams that are on it. It's the way it's kind of formatted out. But obviously, it's way too early to run through the schedule and give wins and losses. But I just thought it was worth noting some of the highlights, which is obviously going to Ole Miss and Tennessee is going to be crazy because they both hate Kiffin. The double stretch of road games at the end of November, the stretch, basically November as a whole, playing Bama, Texas, at Tennessee, at Arkansas is wild. So, it's going to be a fun schedule for sure to go through, but it's going to be a difficult one. But again, we don't even know what the roster is going to look like yet for next season. We don't even have like a finalized coaching staff right now for LSU. I will say this, just to make up for a mistake from our last episode. It looked like LSU was going to hire Elijah Robinson to be their defensive line coach. That looks like it's a little bit up in the air right now. They're still searching for a D-line coach. Elijah Robinson, I think, is still on the table, but it seems a little bit more unlikely now that that's going to happen. So we're still kind of waiting on that. But still, again, we don't know what the finalized coaching staff's going to look like. Will Kevin Smith be the RB coach? Will Frank Wilson be the RB coach? Like, there's still so many things to decide by September the 5th when they kick off against Clemson that it's way too early to talk about any of the wins, losses, all that stuff yet. So we'll get to that, obviously, before the start of next college football season. But for now, just know that schedule is going to be kind of hectic and kind of crazy. But finally, I want to talk about some transfers real fast because, of course, the transfer portal is not officially open, but there are some interesting names entering the transfer portal for LSU, as well as some interesting names that LSU is potentially looking into. And I want to start by talking about some of the guys that have entered the portal for LSU already. And some of these names have definitely been very interesting for me to see pop up just because I felt like that was somebody that I thought was going to stay, potentially somebody that I thought was going to, come back for another year. But there's others that, man, it's not really surprising at all. And the first one I want to talk about is Ashton Stamps. So Ashton Stamps is a guy that a couple years ago, man, he was, your outside starting corner. He just was. He was the corner that you were like, man, he is out there every single game, fighting his tail off out there, trying to be opposite of Zy Alexander. And, and that's, that was kind of the thing, like that was who was kind of out there every single game. He had a ton of snaps, a ton of experience. And coming into this year, you thought, okay, he's been starting the last couple years. He's played a lot. Maybe he's going to be the one that's opposite of Mansour Delane. And then PJ Woodland ends up being your starting outside corner for the first couple games. And then kind of that gives way to DJ Pickett. So Ashton Stamps, it's not really a surprise. Like he didn't really play at all this year, maybe outside of a few games, but Ashton Stamps, it's not surprising that he is leaving because I think he is a guy that definitely like had some potential, but he was also not like the best starting corner in the world, considering he got beaten out by two younger guys this year. I think that should confirm that. So Ashton Stamps is gone. Kylan Billiot, Jelani Watkins, two receivers that like didn't really get a whole lot of playing time, and honestly, they had potential. Billiot is a 6'3" receiver from Louisiana, and a lot of people had a lot of high hopes maybe that he could do something, but the thing is the receiving core, man, like for LSU is just always so loaded down. And you've got guys that are probably going to return next year that are going to play a significant role, but that Kiffin's going to probably go out there and land some guys in the transfer portal as well, and maybe already likes some of the younger guys that are on the team too that could potentially be good fits for his offense. And so I think Billiot just saw the writing on the wall and decided to get out of town. And with Jelani Watkins, really, he's 5'10", 160 from Houston. Man, I just don't think his future's in football. He's got speed for days. He is so much fun to play with in the college football video games because like he has got like a 99 speed and like 99 excel. But see, that's about it. He is just a fast guy. I think his future is more so in track than it is football, but who knows? Maybe he can go to a group of 5 school or maybe even to a Big 12 school and make some plays while running track as well and do some good things. But I don't think either of those guys, I don't want to say that they're not going to be huge transfers, out. But again, I think these are two guys that you're not shocked that are leaving because they obviously weren't good enough to get on the field for LSU already in their early careers. And it doesn't look like there's really much of a future for them at LSU moving forward. So, yeah, you're not surprised by that. Sydir Mitchell is a defensive tackle that obviously never even saw the field at all this year. And then he actually announced like midway through the season that he was going to enter the transfer portal. So, like, no real shock there for Sydir Mitchell. Bless his heart. 6'6", 320. Had all the size in the world. But, he was recruited by Bo Davis because Bo Davis likes the big space-eating defensive tackles. And then Bo Davis leaves to go to the NFL. Then you got Kyle Williams coming in who likes to kind of model his defensive tackles kind of after himself. A little bit on the smaller side, but quicker, able to get to the quarterback a little bit faster. Like, just a different style of defensive line, and Sydir Mitchell just didn't work out. Now, as for a defensive lineman that did shock me that he entered the portal, Ahmad Bro. Ahmad Bro played a lot over the last 2 years and has had some really awesome moments, honestly. He's never been like the most dominant defensive tackle. He was supposed to be a defensive end and he ended up bulking up to being a defensive tackle, but man, he was a really solid rotational piece for that defensive group. And it's more so surprising because like Jacobian Guillory is out of eligibility, Bernard Gooden is out of eligibility. You're bringing in some younger guys, but you would figure Ahmad Bro would have a pretty significant, spot for him on next year's defensive line, no matter who they're bringing in, to play with him or whoever the new defensive line coach is going to be. But that's the thing. He was really tight with Kyle Williams, who was his defensive coordinator in high school. And I think Ahmad Bro maybe just wants to be a full-time starter, not necessarily a rotational piece. And that's fine. It just kind of shocked me because it felt like he was a really, really awesome Tiger that was dedicated to being here and seemed like he played a lot because he had a lot of good talent, and he did. But it's just at the end of the day, he just wants to go test the waters and go somewhere else. And you just can't be mad anymore, man. It's just like one of those things. Like, it's just hard to be mad because it's just the era we're living in. But Ahmad Bro will be out the door as well. Then you got Caleb Jackson, who is not really a big surprise because Jackson had a couple highlight runs in year 1, trucking a guy at Mississippi State and fun stuff like that. But man, it just seems like he's a kind of more of an old school power back that just doesn't really match up well, anymore. I kind of hoped maybe he could bounce back this year after trimming off some weight, getting back to a playing weight that he felt comfortable with. But it really became the Caden Durham, Harlan Berry show at one point, and that was just about it. And so for Caleb Jackson, I don't blame him at all. I thought he probably would have actually transferred after last year, but we're getting it a year later. So not surprised by him at all. But I was a little surprised by Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson, of course, phenomenal player from Lafayette, Louisiana, came in as a quarterback prospect. And I think this is where some of the drama for him kind of starts. Because he came in as a quarterback, but they kind of said, hey, look, we're already projecting you to play defensive back at the next level. And I think he was cool with that. And then, he's playing defensive back, and you have some injuries and some suspensions, and now he's moving to running back. Well, and then, you get some injuries and some other things. Well, then he moves to quarterback just for the spring, just to play around a little bit. And then they move him back to running back. And then he plays running back this year. But then he goes on Twitter at the end of the season. He's like, man, I'm mad. We never even got to try me out at quarterback. And and I threw for all these records in high school and stuff like that. And that's kind of the first sign that I had that, like, oh, he's probably gone. When a guy starts saying stuff like that, he's probably not sticking around. And so Juwan Johnson, like, I'm not going to say he's a spoiled brat or anything. Look, maybe he deserved a chance at quarterback. I don't know. But all I know is this. You played running back, and you fumbled the ball quite a bit, especially at the goal line at Ole Miss. I mean, obviously, like, there's something to be said that, like, yeah, you probably could go somewhere and play really well. But you're not, like, just the most elite player we've ever seen. Now, again, he could go hurt us somewhere else, but I do think Juwan Johnson will land somewhere, and he'll play good. But Juwan Johnson, man, like, there was obviously a reason why they didn't play at quarterback. I just care to venture there's probably something that screamed, hey, he's probably not a starter for an SEC program at quarterback. So good luck with that. But a phenomenal athlete, and he'll fit in somewhere. But so that's kind of a big loss. But I think the biggest loss so far of the guys who have officially put out their names that they'll enter the portal when it opens, of all those guys I just listed, Ahmad Bro is the biggest one so far. And, of course, there will probably still be more that enter, but that's just our list for now. So we'll update it as we go along as well. But that's where we're going to wrap this one up. Hey, thank you guys so much for following along. Make sure to like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. You can follow us on Instagram at BayouRoarPod. We would love to interact with you, hear your predictions for the college football playoff. I don't think we'll have another episode up by the end of the week, but next time we will talk about LSU's bowl game against Houston at the Texas Bowl, and then we'll talk about our reactions from the first few college football playoff games happening this weekend. So have a great week. Enjoy the first round of the college football playoff. And as always, let's go Tigers.